I'm trying to
I was
argue with this. It's only mildly
Styrofoam tabs that
successful.
they have in there now. They're in product.
Oh,
Yeah. I know what you mean.
There's
You know,
believe it or
there's
not, there's
tabs that are
three.
easy and come up with
This
some
was the
kind
tie I
of
selected.
configuration that
Yeah.
is.
No, if you
It was also the tie you
Actually,
wanted.
most of the recent military helmet developments that have been real genuine improvements actually have been in the pads and the suspension, the system chin systems of the
Came
not
naturally.
necessarily in the shell itself. On ballistic helmets.
Oh, yeah. Oh, makes sense.
Oh, so we're on, by the way, and we should get started.
Let's get it on.
Yeah, let's get it on. Well, in a friendly sort of way.
Right.
Not the way that. So I went to the blog, and as you can see, Saturday, September 29th, that was our last session.
Correct.
Not Saturday, but Saturday was when I posted. Fortunately, I sometimes remember to also say Friday evening or whenever. I can make it even more confusing by forgetting to say when I'm talking
Go
about.
ahead and slide that to the side.
But, so the first quiz question last week was that goofy one about the Spanish Inquisition. No one expects the Spanish Inquisition. Why did they use the comfy chair? That's just dumb stuff.
Why did they use the what?
The comfy chair is torture. See that? Are you familiar with it? You've not seen much of the Monty Python. You were surprised when I showed the scene where they were singing "Every Sperm is Sacred."
That was hilarious, by the way.
By the way, for its day, it was outrageous.
Well, it's still funny now.
Although I played some Monty Python stuff for my kids, and they're just ho hum.
Huh.
You know,
Yeah.
back when that stuff came out, I would have been so embarrassed that my parents would have known I was even watching that kind of stuff.
Have you ever seen Mr. Bean's skit about the guy's kid is dead or something like that? Yeah. Johnny's dead or something like
Oh,
that?
yeah.
Oh my gosh, that is funny.
Yeah, we'd expel him if he wasn't dead.
Yeah.
What? You mean my son is dead? Well, yeah, but, you know, it's his behavior we're talking about. He's not showing up.
You've never seen it? Oh, it is epically funny.
I love British humor, but some American audiences have a hard time digesting it. It's very intellectual, so it's or cerebral, whatever.
That's not American.
Right.
Laurel and Hardy. That's us, I suppose.
That's right.
Well, how about that Bob Hope, I think it was? No, not Bob Hope. Something new.
But let's get started, because there's enough of us here, and it's 6:35, or yes, 6:35.
Holy
Already
smokes.
5 minutes late, so I'll get started. So the first topic tonight is ontology, which, if we look at the definition, we have talked about ontology before briefly when I mentioned the ontological argument. I think we've talked about that both when we talked about Anselm and then when we talked about other things and just flew right by that ontological argument. So tonight we're looking at ontology in a little more serious mode, because we're not just using it as the adjective for a particular type of argument, but instead we're doing ontology, or more specifically, as Amy at one point refers to it as metalinguistic negotiations. So metalinguistic negotiations. In other words, if we realize that when we're doing ontology, the study of what there is, right? What is there? What exists out there? We're actually worried about how we use words to refer to our environment. What things in our environment do we give the status of existence? So we can argue over that. We can argue over whether numbers exist, for example. That's an issue that's been around since Plato, as far as I know. Might even be older than that. So thousands of years we've been arguing over whether numbers exist. Plato actually thought numbers exist more so than tables and chairs and things of that sort. We actually have still people today that aren't really sure that tables exist. Instead, they prefer to think in terms of the particles. The particles that make up tables and chairs exist, but tables and chairs do not. Because they want to be limited in what they're referring to as actually existing. Although in very common sense, everyday speech, of course, we don't even think about the particles that are making up tables and chairs, because we're not physicists, we're not particle physicists, we're not even concerned about that. We're concerned about whether or not somebody knocked the table over in the living room, right? Who left their junk on the table and et cetera. In fact, we're not even concerned about whether or not those things exist. We're just sure they're there. Right? But I remember when Professor Quine gave a lecture at my college years ago. I was absolutely very impressed. He was like the biggest philosopher in the U.S. at the time. He died in December of 2000, as I recall. But at the time, when he came in and he gave a lecture, it was about what a mathematical logician is supposed to do. What is his job? And for Quine, his main job, because that's part of philosophy. Basically a logician. If you look at what he did, apart from his time in the military. By the way, I think it's odd that of all the pictures they have of Quine, they have tons. Why for Wikipedia did they stick his passport picture so that you get that great big seal on the picture? I don't know why they selected that one. In any case,
It's
if you look
probably
at
a
his... Pardon?
secret Illuminati message within there.
I'm sure not, actually. He was too busy in mathematical logic to deal with people like that. But he did bring some Europeans over prior to Hitler, and rescued them basically by persuading them to come to the United States so that they could have a temporary teaching position over here. And most of them didn't come because they thought, well, Hitler's going to take over and kill us. They actually came over because it sounded like a really neat thing to do for a year or two. But fortunately, they were still here when Hitler did start killing people of that sort. Unfortunately, he didn't persuade everyone that he was interested in bringing back, but he brought back some interesting folks. And meanwhile, he was also a graduate student studying over there, but mostly studying mathematical logic. So that's not something that most of us get to study today, although it is a big profession, a big area of interest, still very, very important in philosophy and mathematics and logic, etc. But what exactly was his concern? What was his lecture all about? His job, he said at the moment, was to help physicists understand how they could communicate what they were doing. They had gotten to the point in physics where they literally had no language to express what it was that they were dealing with. Part of that problem was because English and other Western European languages require you to have nouns in your sentences, which are the kinds of things that most people realize, when they're constructing a sentence. It's not a complete thought unless you have a noun in it. Some presidential tweets ignore those, but for the most part, you have to have a noun, you have to have a complete sentence, right? Otherwise, you're not expressing a complete thought. But the problem was, nouns, what are nouns? What do we use nouns for? People, places, things,
And ideas.
ideas, which we, I guess, subsume under things, maybe? Is love a thing?
Yeah. It's a virtue. The virtue is a thing, right?
I suppose. I mean, we know very well what we're talking about when we talk about love. I remember talking with one of my brothers. I was kind of horrified because he just gotten a divorce, divorced his wife, and I was horrified that he was doing that. And you can see I'm still married. It's going to be our 46th wedding anniversary on the 7th of October.
Congratulations.
So we're coming up on our 46th. Yay, yay me.
You're almost to the golden.
Yeah, I looked up what 46th the present is, and there's nothing there. Poetry. So I started doing a poem, and all my friends told me, no, you better work on this.
That's awesome. Congrats. You have been
Something
very
like
promoted and I'm proud.
roses are red, violins are blue. Something about my shoes are whatever. I got it all screwed up. But my brother's divorced his wife, 3 children, and he divorced her. And I said to him, what on earth are you doing? And he said, well, have you ever fallen in love? As if, well, you don't even know what love is, so is it a thing? What is it? Well, of course, we say we married for love. Actually, I remember asking a lot of women if they will marry me, and all of them said no. Until I asked Donna. And when I asked Donna, will you marry me, she laughed at me. And for some reason, I thought that meant yes. It was only later that she explained to me that she hadn't actually said yes. I just assumed. But hey, she did.
Working so
actually-
far.
She did actually, walk down the aisle with the flowers. It was so cute, how those little flowers all shake when the baby's breath, right? So as you're walking, they're just shaking like you're petrified. That was great. How? So what is love? Is it a thing? But we know what we're talking about. We don't usually get into the ontology behind it. It's kind of a peculiar thing. Nor do the scientists. They find these particles and they're going in and out of existence. So how do they express what they're finding when the particles that they're talking about don't persist? By definition, they're not things. And yet those are the whatevers that make up the things. So physics had gotten, and still is, at the point where it's not commonsensical at all. So Quine and others give us predicate logic, which is kind of interesting. So predicate logic. So what are we doing with predicates? Well, predicates are now essentially what give us the objects, because predicates give us the set, the characteristics of the set of things. And so what Quine and others introduce is variables. Variables that you explain by saying their characteristics are these predicates. So for example, to write this correctly, I have to give give the definition of the variable, it's x. And then I say, if x is p, which in this case I'm thinking is a man, a person, then x is mortal. So basically, this symbolism, mathematical logic, allows me to express all men are mortal, right? If it's a man, then it is mortal.
So the sideways U means then?
This is if then.
Okay.
There's different fonts for different things. And of course,
You were
this
testing your lid, I saw.
Yes, and you know, it was again a dismal failure, but fortunately, it missed everything, so I'm good.
So then
I should put it someplace else though, where it won't spill all
it's
over
less likely to
where the computers
damage your
and
computer.
stuff are. But so I have predicate logic. So we now have a situation where the variables are not actually things, but they are part of sets. So set theory essentially comes up, and we have Quine's wonderful expression: to be is to be the value of the variable. That's obviously a funny. Quine has a sense, or did have a sense of humor. It's just you have to be into mathematical logic in order to pick up on what's so funny. One of the other things he plays on is that wonderful phrase that, let me see if I get it right, ontogeny replicates. How's it go? Anybody remember? Ontogeny recapitulates. Homology? I'm not even getting close to that. Not even getting close. No, I've got it reversed. Let's go this way. So, this is the theory that he's playing on here. So there's an old expression. Remember, ontos means a thing, but instead of ontology, the study of things, this is the genetics of things, right? And it recapitulates the phyla, the families, if you will call them that. So the old theory, which by the way is absolutely false, was that all of the mammals that grow as a fetus in a womb basically go through all of the stages of evolution on their way to reaching birth. So that if you were to pull out a fetus at a various point, you could see, oh, it's a fish right now. You know, it's got a tail, it's got gills, and actually, while we're in the womb at various stages, we actually have gills under here, and we actually have a tail. It shortens, etc. As we, right? Are you familiar with this at all? Mm-hmm. But absolutely, this theory is essentially wrong. That's not what's going on. So it's not like we're going through all the previous stages of evolution on the way to birth, right? But that was a theory that lasted for quite some time. People thought that was what was going on. Well, Quine gives us, instead of ontogeny, he changes it to ontology recapitulates.
If I recall correctly, I believe I read that before we are born, our hemoglobin has a greater attraction to oxygen as well.
So Quine's joke on that theory is that ontology recapitulates philology. So basically what we mean by things follows the evolution of our language, which is actually true, I think. I don't know where all the different words come from that we have, like going commando, has nothing to do with the military, as far as I know. I don't know where that came from. Some of you are laughing because you know what going commando is. You know. However, so that's fun. So Quine has some jokes embedded in his works that you can find if you catch them. Isn't British humor, by the way. Quine was Manx, M-A-N-X, from the island of Manx. Is that right? Yes? It's a actual place.
Is that kind of like the Isle of Man?
Yeah,
Say, is that
yes,
what-
yes.
The Isle of Man.
Yeah, it should be in here. Wikipedias are fantastic articles. Remember back in the day when they thought they were crap? Now they're like the first thing that comes up, and everybody uses them at least to head off the.
What's great is it's a consensus forum, so.
It's democracy in action.
Right, I mean, you don't have to have one person generating a bunch of data, you have
Everybody's helping
consensus.
out.
Yeah.
I still have concerns about it though, because, I mean, just because you have a bunch of people agreeing on something doesn't mean that it's necessarily actually true. So I have concerns about that.
Well,
They haven't-
that's exactly the problem we have with the pragmatic theory of meaning, because we come to conclude, what do we mean is true? What do we mean by a person?
Yeah, why
So-
do we have a consensus that that whiteboard is white?
Sure. I think it's mean.
Now, the fun thing of this problem, though, is that it's not totally socially constructed, which is a wonderful expression. A lot of things are socially constructed. You can pick out certain examples that are wonderfully designed, almost like money, you know, is socially constructed. You know, everybody knows that paper is not really worth, you know, it's just a piece of paper, but we give it value as long as we have a consensus that the value is enough for me to trade you this for that, then it's got that value, and we agree with it. Of course, you're in a place like Venezuela, where the money now is at the point, I suppose, where you can bring wheelbarrows of the stuff and not get a loaf of bread.
Or Zimbabwe? Yeah.
Yeah, and I know
Fine examples of the success of socialism.
my wife's grandfather, who had lived in Germany in between World War I and World War II, said exactly that. If you were trying to buy something, you had to bring wheelbarrows of the money in order to try to get the exchange thing. Obviously,
It's got a great burning.
yeah, or using it to wallpaper your wall, because, you know, it's cheaper than wallpaper, et cetera.
Insulate the wall.
So we, in a pragmatic worldview, we think of our definitions as being agreed upon by the use of the people that use the language. The fluent speakers are the ones that come up with new expressions, and you have to keep up with you have to stay fluent. And in a way, I think the most important part of my job and what I'm really interested in doing is being part of the current conversation the intellectual conversation about everything that's going on, from Kavanaugh's committee, the committee hearing Kavanaugh, et cetera, and they're voting, and Murkowski, getting to listen to Senator Murkowski today talking about her decision. All that stuff I think of as one big worldwide conversation that I want to participate in. And I want to stay fluent in it, so I have to read the news, I have to watch what I can of what's going on. I have to read books about it, and so on. And then spend time talking with others who are doing the same thing as we try to understand what's going on ourselves through our discussions, and wine usually helps.
Yeah.
However, as language changes, we end up with, at least in some areas, and physics is certainly one of those, where it becomes obvious that what we really need to do is create new language that hasn't existed before. So a lot of these words, like quarks, these are brand new inventions. In fact, it's fun, 3 quarks for Muster Mark. Where did the word quark come from? But physicists need new words for things that they're finding that weren't there before. And what Quine pointed out was, because these particles are so small and going in and out of existence, that we don't think of the particle as the thing anymore, but instead the relationship that it's in. So if you have 2 particles and 2 boxes, box A and B, this was Quine's presentation to me back in the early 70s or whatever it was. You've got 2 boxes, 2 particles, so you have the situation where the one particle is in box A and the other one's in box B. You can have the situation where both particles are in box A and no particles in box B, or both particles in box B and no particles in box A. But the other possibility that we would normally have is where you have this particle in B and this particle in A, which should be different than when the one particle is in A and the other one is in B. It seems like that would be 2 different situations. Well, the answer, though, is today that's not different, because the particles are so exactly the same that you really only have the variety of things where you have one in each, both over here or both over here. Those are the only predicates that you would assign. So you wouldn't have different situations where instead of X, you would have a particular thing. So George, George is a person, right? George is a particle in this box, and then George is a particle over in this box, and have them reversed. No, we don't have George anymore. George is no longer in the building. We instead now have in the box. So the issue of ontology has.
I was going to say, was this a direct impact on something like Schrodinger, for instance? I'm definitely not a fan of Schrodinger, the whole Schrodinger's cat description, but it does seem like a similar attempt at.
Well, I mean, they are dealing with particles there, decaying particles in that, and so if you're looking at a situation where you have what that model, right? Schrodinger's cat. I'll throw it up here, folks.
Yeah, it definitely tries to sort out how a paradox that seems to be mutually exclusive could actually be.
This paradox is trying to bridge the gap between the quantum world and the real world. So how does the cat both live theoretically and die depending on the decay of the particle? Thanks.
In response to his question about the relationship between quines, are the particles here, there, or both, and so forth? It actually, to me, it reminded me more about what ended up becoming quantum entanglement.
Oh,
Because,
very,
you know, if
very
you-
interesting problem, but
Yeah.
it's actually different.
Totally.
Because that's where you're actually looking at two particles becoming so entangled that you do something to the one and it affects the other one,
Right, I get
no
that.
matter where they are.
But what made me think of that was when you were talking about, you know, well, it turns out that this particle isn't really actually necessarily different from that particle.
Yeah,
They're
I was thinking
sort of-
quantum entanglement too when you were describing that.
That's what made me think of that.
Yeah.
Well, I suppose that, you know, there are 6 quarks, the up, the down, the strange, the charmed, the top, and the bottom, right? And, you know, everything is made of quarks, but it's never been clear to me that that means there's anything more than still those 6 quarks.
Isn't it protons are
And
composed
just
of?
all, so some protons are 2 up and 1 down, neutrons are 2 down and 1 up quarks.
Oh, okay.
Right? So those are, the larger particles are made of, yeah, we actually have the standard model that you can take a look at, see how they've updated it, because it doesn't stay the same. Come on.
Who knows, maybe
It's
one
some
day
nice charts here.
quantum entanglement
So-
might be what leads us to transporters.
Beam me up, Scotty.
Sure.
Yeah, yeah. The neat thing about that, when you're talking about being a persistent person, you know, you come up with this beam me up situation where if you get into a particle or a transporter and you're beamed from here to Mars or wherever, of course the issue is that when you get into the transporter and you're no longer in point A, but you are in point B, according to this possible theory that might happen someday, if we can figure out how to do it, it's not the same body that was here that's now gone that is over there. It's a copy. Right? So unlike Dr.
3D printer.
McCoy, who didn't want to get in the transporter very often because he didn't want his atoms splattered all over the universe, as he used to say, that's not actually what happens. It's not, these atoms are being sent to the other place. It's like a perfect copy. This arrangement is duplicated over there.
So then the problem
Because
becomes-
of the idea of quantum entanglement.
Right.
So the particles that are here are gone, but they're entangled with enough particles to basically replicate this exact same individual, including your thoughts, feelings, etc. So that being the case, who wants to get into this machine? Who wants to be transported? You game?
Yeah, I'm cool with it, and I'd like a tummy tuck while we're at it.
Yeah, well, you know, yeah, there's plenty of movies that play with that. What's the one where it ends up with 6 copies of the same guy, but they each deteriorate somewhat. So the last guy, what's it called?
Are you thinking of The Sixth Day with Schwarzenegger?
Moon, but I'm not sure.
No, there was a movie that was just deliberately silly and hilarious. Where there's the one guy ended up with like 6 different variations of himself. Multiplicity.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, that was it.
Wasn't that with Ben Stiller?
Yes, I believe so. Right. Actually, as much as I talk about that movie as a perfect example of that problem, I've never actually seen the movie.
I think it's an older movie.
Yeah, yeah, it's been
What
out.
exactly
for a
do you
while.
mean by older? What are you trying to say?
Yeah.
You know, like,
Well, so this is all part of what is causing the physicists problems, is they're broaching into new realms of thought about the nature of reality that are beyond what our language has previously had to deal with, and so they've had to essentially change the language, and now predicate logic is the way we apply to everything. So when Amy is talking about the problem of tables in the video, the folks that would like to use this as their way of describing reality aren't going to talk about tables. They're talking about the particles that are in the table rather than the table itself. So the sets of things that are being a table at the moment, right? And only the smallest particles in the whole thing exist. But notice Amy says that the easy way out of this problem of ontology is to basically just say that the way we talk about things in everyday life is perfectly fine. All you have to do is keep in mind that we're talking about different contexts. So in different contexts, the meaning of the words certainly might mean different things. And you have to be a fluent speaker, you actually have to understand the context, not just the meaning of the word. So just like language learning, you get vocabulary cards and you memorize the vocabulary, but until you actually can use them in a particular context, you don't really understand what they're meaning. Interesting?
I was thinking it's sort of language as a model experiment, and sort of as an expression of model language. It seems pretty on targets.
Yeah. I remember one class where we learned the word plastinku. So this was a Russian class, and we learned the word plastinku was the Russian word for a vinyl record. You get the relationship? Plastic. Plastinku, right? So a plastinku is a record. And we were puzzled, so what other context could you use that in? And so someone asked, so if so-and-so runs the 100-yard dash faster than anyone, he breaks the Mirovuyu Plastinku, the world record, right? And the teacher said, well, you could say it, but we don't say it. And we were just so puzzled. We ended up arguing over this for about a half hour because of course the Russians are concerned about world record. Of course you guys use it. But no, you can say it, but we don't use it. And then finally, after about half an hour of discussion over what kind of world record you would be breaking, right? He said, record. The Mirovuyu record, would be the world record. That's a different kind of thing. Plastinku is the vinyl. That's what that word means. So yeah, we do call them records in English, but no, that's a very different thing than what we mean when we talk about a world record, right? That's a different thing. And so English words in different contexts end up requiring different foreign words in order to replicate the differences in those different kinds of contexts, etc. Studying languages, by the way, is absolutely a hoot because you find out all kinds of crazy things about your own language you wouldn't know otherwise. So that's when you talk about the advantages of learning foreign languages, one of them is the startling discoveries you make about your own language from seeing the differences in all of these other things.
Which alludes back to the boson.
Alludes back to the
Bosons and quarks, because as you examine one particular instance of reality, it gives you a perspective on the next ones that you continue to examine, which is like the ontological sequence of experience, right?
Yeah.
Kind of.
Yeah. Well. So ontology replicates philology, So
Right.
so the evolution of the gives us. That's just funny and interesting at the same time. Yeah, of course, it also ruins your head because whenever you see a word, you're immediately wondering, gee, I wonder where did that come from?
you start
funky, you know, where did funky come from? Where did you get that funky music? And then well, in German, funk means radio, so you get all kinds of, one of my favorites, of course, was going into basic training, and everyone in the Army, you know, would hand you a sleeping bag, but they wouldn't call it a sleeping bag, they would call it a fart sack. And, you know, of course, initially you're thinking that's hilarious, especially considering the food they're feeding us. And if you're sleeping in these bags, that's exactly what it is, you know, it's a fart sack. But then you get to Germany and you discover fart sack means travel bag. Because fährt means to travel, right? You know, so, and sack, bag, right? So, ha ha ha, you know, there's so many different, you know, like a grunt, you know, if you've ever been referred to as a grunt in the military, but then you find out that infantry in Russian is gruntovoy, so literally infantry is, you know, it's just amazing where all these words come from. Of course, a lot of the Russian words come from French, you know, so it's just, you know, all of these words are basically splattered all over the universe. There's some absolutely fantastic stuff on the problems in translation. I highly recommend reading a book titled, Is That a Fish in Your Ear?
Other than their Cyrillic writing system, is there other Greek linguistic influence on Russian that you can, I was just curious about, because I know the writing is based on Cyrillic.
Oh, yeah.
quite a lot.
Okay.
Yeah, you might think of the Slavic languages as Greek-based, actually.
I did not know that. Huh. Cool.
Is that a fish in your ear? That's just hilarious stuff. The author of this, by the way, is the chair of the foreign language department at Princeton University. But oh my goodness, it's hilarious. There's just side-splitting humor and various chapters on the problems. And the title, of course, is exactly, obviously, no one would say, is that a fish in your ear? It's the kind. About halfway through the book, you find out where that came from. But I'm absolutely puzzled about English. I don't think English is a real language.
Isn't the one thing I learned?
You know, because it's a hodgepodge
That's fair.
of all these other elements. And speaking of which, hodgepodge is Hungarian, as far as I know.
It's pretty much the only thing I learned in like between Russian, German, and French. The only thing I learned about the thing I learned in English sucks.
Yeah, lots of people tell you that English is, we've got some folks in the room, I bet, that feel like English is absolutely the most sucky language they've ever faced, and yet have to learn the dang thing in order to get a good job and so on. However, so ontology, so what things do we argue about having meaning? Are things are worthy of our attention? So when we talked about the fetus, and we talked about what it is to say something as a person, we were doing what Amy is talking about as meta-linguistic negotiation. So you've got these two different sides, or multiple sides, and some of them feel like the fetus is a person, others feel like it's not. I feel tempted to bring up Kavanaugh, Brett Kavanaugh, and you know, all the things being discussed. There's clearly sides to this. Whether or not he's a decent human being or not depends on the side of the people that you are engaged in discussing. Some are absolutely horrified that you would not give him confirmation based on something that happened 36 years ago that they might think was typical teenage, you know, ridiculous, right? And of course, on the other, you've got folks that feel like this is indicative of a character that just ought not to be a Supreme Court judge, etc. So that we take sides. And when you look at the sides, you look at the language people use, and you end up then with a sense that their being a fluent speaker of a particular segment of the language that makes them think the way they do instead of the other side that thinks a different way. A perfect example of this approach is George Lakoff. And take a video. Let's see. Let's see if I can. Let me find one that's.
Not to be treated like some little wife at home, I want to be part of things.
To be part of everything. Frame, and it has two parts. Roles or frame elements. For example, take a hospital. You have doctors, patients, nurses, orderlies, receptionists, instruments like scalpels, places like operating rooms. Those are the frame elements. Then there are scenarios. What happens in this frame? So you know that surgeons operate on patients with scalpels and operating rooms, right? And lots of other things happen in the frame. So that is what a frame is. And you know the boundaries. For example, you walk into the hospital to visit a friend. You go to the reception desk, there's a doctor lying there, they hand you a scalpel, and they say, you're operating on this doctor. It doesn't fit the frame. And you know it doesn't. Okay? That is called breaking the frame. It's outside of it. You think in terms of those frames, and they are physically realized in the neural circuitry of your brain. And one of the things that my colleague Jerry Feldman and his students at Berkeley have done is figure out the kind of neural computation needed to characterize frames. And it's actually pretty simple. There's a reason why we think in this way. Now, the other great result about frames is Charles Fillmore's. He's a member of my linguistics department, now retired, one of the great linguists in the world. He figured out that every word in every language is defined relative to a frame. Every word, like surgeon, or scalpel, or menu for a restaurant, and so on. You understand it in terms of a structure like that.
Speaking of menu, remember one of the Lord of the Rings movies where the orcs are all starving and they're upset? Why can't we have some meat?
Right.
Says the one, how about his legs? He doesn't need those. And they end up getting into a fight, and the one guy ends up getting killed, and once this guy is killed, the head orc in the group says, "Looks like meat's back on the menu, boys." And of course, what hits me is, menu? These are orcs. If you're using the word menu, they must go to restaurants. What restaurants do orcs go to? Sorry, that was a little. This is George.
That. So this is normal. Frames are the most normal things in the world, and we'll see in a minute that they are thoroughly political. Then there's metaphor, and I'll tell you just briefly about that, because that is also thoroughly political.
So, George Lakoff, lots of interesting stuff. Teaches at Berkeley, however you say it. And one of his famous books is Don't Think of an Elephant, which indicates, of course, that as soon as you're told not to think of such a thing, that's the first thing you think of, etc. Try thinking of something else when someone says don't think of an elephant. But he also ties it into politics. So, by the way, one of his books was under President Obama's arm when he was photographed moving around. So he was reading that. And I think that was prior to the second election. So people were saying that Obama's familiarity with his conceptions about this might have helped him in the way he framed his speeches, etc. But of course, this applies to ontology too, because the way you have these frames designed are going to apply to the meaning of the words, whether they're things, whether they're valuable things, whether it's something we want to protect or not, like the life of a child or the life of a fetus. What does it mean to be a person, etc. And some of the other words that she talks about in her article. Art, for example. When people come up with new art, they're desperately trying to be new, creative, come up with something new. But one example she talks about, I don't know if you used the internet to look some of these up. That's one thing about this text. It doesn't give you pictures of things, which, by the way, makes it a lot cheaper. But it also means that if you want to see what some of these examples are, you actually have to go on the internet to see what they are. But one of them was Liz McGore's Time and Mrs. Tiber. Time and Mrs. Tiber. Did you look any of these up to see what they because she doesn't describe them very fully. So you're looking at a display in a museum that is a shelf full, looks like the kind of thing you'd have in your pantry, of your canning for the harvest. So if you can your vegetables or whatever from your garden, etc. So that's art. That was submitted as an art, a work of art. Well, of course, the problem is these things are going to rot. And eventually they're not going to be an art, it's not going to be the same piece anymore because everything's going to look different, it's going to deteriorate, so on. I know how that works. I have a storage room in our house, and the other day I found a bottle of juice. I brought it up, sat it on the counter to open. My wife looked at the date, and it had expired in 2005 or something.
Then not only is it living art, it's evolving art.
It could be. It could be. Yeah. Well, you could argue that too. We still have the bottle. It hasn't been opened because it's grape juice. If it's no longer good, that would mean it has turned into what? Vinegar, right? So
wine.
It could. Well, I doubt if it will turn into wine just sitting in a plastic bottle. You got to have
One
the
can
right.
hope.
And it doesn't turn into vinegar unless a fly gets in there.
Is that where that comes from?
Yeah.
I don't know. So
you have to have
just
poison.
because we haven't found it for all these years doesn't mean that we wasted the money on it. Can't we still drink it? Would it kill us? I don't. What do you think? You look like you're horrified that I still have juice from 2005.
Just reminds me of when my mother bought a house, and the reason she got it so cheap is the guy was a bachelor and he had no desire to clean it. So that was part of the deal, is that he wanted to just walk away, go live on his boat, and
Just so long as you don't
he cleaned
move
it,
the wheelchair and a
that's when
shotgun
they
goes off.
had, like the years on milk and stuff like that. It's disgusting.
I have eaten MREs that are decades old, and they are fine. And it actually does say somewhere on packaging that the date on this is a date for inspection, not expiration or something like that. And truthfully, as long as the MRE isn't bulged, it's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but that's an MRE, not a car.
Yeah, MREs don't have expiration dates. We could probably go to a nuclear war and MREs will still be A-okay.
Yeah, isn't that like the whole point, right?
The bulge being the gas from
Yeah,
the
if it's bulged, it's bad.
bacteria.
Don't even open it.
Right.
You will puke. If you open a bulged MRE, you will puke. Don't do it.
Speaking of puke, you can have puke as art. I mean, I've seen some
Oh, yeah.
really horrible art projects.
Especially on
One of the
Haight
ones
Ashbury.
that sticks in my mind from when I was in college we went on a bus trip up to New York and went and see MoMA, right, the Museum of Modern Art. I remember, the only one I remember, actually, was in a stairwell going up. There was like a little white, not podium, but, you know, a pillar, like, there's a different word for it, if you put art on it, let's say.
Pedestal.
Pedestal, okay, pedestal. In any case, sitting right on top of it was a beautiful pewter dog shit. And I looked at it, you know, and it looked exactly like, you know, like the dog just had shit on this pedestal, except of course it was pewter.
Pewter.
No, it didn't smell at all, because pewter is kind of
Come
not very
on.
aromatic. But it was absolutely very clear. You know, I've looked on the internet for it since, and I haven't found it. But there it is, and you know, it just stood in my mind. People are getting away with everything. Well, I mean, you can of course find artists can their own shit, right? You know, so I mean, you can look that up, and sure enough, it's there. Roger Scruton talks about that, as horrified as he is. Remember in his talk about beauty and where the artists are going, he criticizes kitsch, and a lot of the art that people create is just to shock people. But there's other things that you can be puzzled over whether it should be considered art or not. So for example, tilt brush. I love it. It's absolutely fascinating. How many of you are familiar with tilt brush or these 3D art programs?
Yeah.
So that was, by the way, the advertisement that got me to spend, let's see, $1,400 plus 500 and whatever. Yeah, right. So I want to try that. I'm going to go do that. So went to Best Buy. I bought my laptop at the PX, $14.99. And
It's a good laptop.
It's called a laptop, but it's bigger than some desktops that I've seen. You know, it's one of those things. But you need your computer to be big enough to plug in your goggles, etc. But you put all that in there, and then of course you end up having to download the program so that you could do that. But guess what? It's obviously what's happening here, and I don't know how they do it, is in order to see what she's doing, you'd have to be wearing the goggles and kind of in her artwork, right, in order to see it. I don't know how they somehow filmed what it would look like to her being in the goggles,
It's actually
right?
pretty straightforward, but yeah.
It is? Okay. Yeah, I guess you've got a blue screen or something to try to put it in there.
Have you
You
tried?
don't even need that. You just need to basically just position points. And I mean, these days you can do that sort of thing just
Yeah, I was thinking there should be a way to render it so that you can see it in 2D in a three-dimensional frame, basically.
Yeah, there's
And once you create one of
So
these,
that's what we're seeing.
you can share it on the sites where people that are using this particular equipment.
I suppose it'd be a different
Sure.
experience than, like, we're viewing them inside the garden versus being in the garden of art that they created.
Right, so when you have them on, you can download art that people have made, right? And like, one of my favorites is Starry Night by
Van Gogh.
Van Gogh. It's not Van Gogh's actual piece, it's, it's based on Van Gogh, but what someone did was do a 3D rendering with,
Nice.
the special effects and everything else, so basically you're standing there in Van Gogh's artwork, right? And it's not just that, I mean, there's all sorts of people that own the equipment can upload it, it's like a sharing site where you can make an art, and by the way, of course, what people are doing with this is making scenery for games and things. So if you figure out, what when you're playing the game, who did the artwork for all of that? It's all art, right? If you look up how, that's incredibly tedious, making all this stuff. Actually, you can copy all sorts of things, copy, paste, etc. And they're moving in the direction where you can play the game in that environment, right? But if you think about it, okay, so this is clearly art, and yet where is it? Right? It's not where, like you could go to a museum. Actually, at the art museum, they had the goggles sitting out for people to put them on and look around. The giant, the main room there, they had it set up. I didn't get to see how they had it set up, but I could imagine, and it's a set where you can put the goggles on, but as well as seeing the virtual reality that's being inside the lenses, you could still see the room you were in, which for safety purposes is a good idea. You have to remember, while you're doing this, moving around and painting, you're also in your living room.
Right.
And if you
Subject to
also
limitations
have
of
a
physical
Saint
reality.
Bernard puppy that's 105 pounds who doesn't realize you can't see her, it could be a problem while you're doing that. Hi.
So now that we're talking about virtual art or art that's in cyberspace or art that doesn't have something that you can physically touch, it caused me to wonder, if you had a sufficiently advanced AI, would that AI have a taste for art potentially? Or would that AI appreciate
Have you heard the
art?
commercial lately that the AI says, I've just been enhanced and I have a desire for flavor. Please stick a sandwich in my USB port or whatever. And you're like,
No, I've never seen
it's
that.
not going to work.
No, I
The
don't watch
poor-
much TV.
That poor AI is not, that's a really dumb.
Is that a real
too.
commercial? You're not kidding.
It is a real commercial.
I hear it on the radio
It's
all the
just
time.
really dumb.
I haven't heard it.
For
Yeah,
Subway.
well, I was gonna say that there's all sorts of shows that come across that idea, like robotics or something coming really sophisticated to acquire taste in art. All I can think of is a strange show called Red Dwarf, where you've got this, one of the characters is a mechanoid, he's a robot, but he looks, it's commonly referred to as a janitorial robot, but it turns out he has an art connoisseurship. And so,
What was your comment that you were gonna make?
Do you actually make art and you share it with the?
I've made art and I've saved it on my own computer, but it's so horrible, I haven't shared it with anyone. I make like a fireplace. Not a fireplace, but like a campfire, right, out in the woods, and it's the crappiest. You can make the sparkles and you can make the flames and, the wood and, they make it a lot easier than
I'm
it is.
just wondering, this is a lot of money, so is this an interest of yours, or were you just oh, that looks cool, I'll try to paint on my house while using this
Well, it's
cool
got,
technology, or are you like artistic and you were like, oh, this would be a cool way to also show my artistic side?
And therapy. And
Stress relief.
also, my wife didn't yell at me because she didn't know I was buying all this stuff until it was already in the house. What were you gonna?
I was gonna say, it's got different uses too besides like the Crystal Rift, you can play games with it, you can, watch movies.
I've tried, believe it or not, $14.99 for the laptop. Get it home. One of the days I decided, okay, let's watch a movie because you could watch it with your Oculus, right? So, you know, I'm looking for the button to push for the DVD to open so I could put a movie in. The dang thing didn't come with a DVD player. I had to go out and buy a crappy little thing and plug it in.
I hate that. I know, right?
But sure enough, you put that in there and you sit down and you're like,
Immersed.
yeah, totally immersed. It's absolutely out of this world and it makes the IMAX or whatever, just, you know, not even close. So,
I think I would spend $14.99 on drones more so on Oculus where I would have to say it.
I admit I'm pretty weird, you know, when it comes to.
But at the same time, I kind of want an Oculus because I hear you guys talking
It's
about
like 2 different realms.
The prices are coming down. The technology is, you know, I've had friends that didn't want to spend that much money, but wanted to get a sense of what we were talking about. So they went out and bought the goggles that you put your phone in.
at Walmart or whatever.
Well,
Like the
Best
Samsung
Buy
one or
Best
something?
Buy has like 5 or 6 different types where you could just. And in fact, the New York Times years ago gave us all, if you were a subscriber, you got Google Cardboard. They sent out for free, and what you do is you put your device in the Google Cardboard, and then as you're moving around, you could see a 360 video of the poor kids in Africa with all the flies flying around, and you look down and you see the kids begging at your feet. It gives you an up close, personal view of just how impoverished other people are.
Glad you're not there, you know.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely glad you're not there.
With your $14.99 Oculus, I'll be looking at them. Like, isn't that ironic? You know what I mean?
They're in HD, you know.
Like,
I'm not physically there, but the cameraman is, and he's filming all these kids with all the flies with a camera that I'm sure is worth way more than my $14.99.
You know what that reminded me of? And what you said was funny, by the way. I got that it definitely hit home. But do you remember those commercials from like the 90s with like Sally Struthers being the poor starving children in Africa? Yeah, but I mean, like, it's like, who are you to talk? It's like,
Sally.
oh my gosh.
Then you find out that the CEO of that organization makes $1 million plus.
Yeah. Turns out nonprofits are actually very profitable.
But
Just
back
not
to the
perfect.
question of ontology in art now, because this is happening. It's not transforming our society the way the folks at Facebook who bought Oculus are hoping. Apparently, they've discovered that the main reason it hasn't been spreading like wildfire is because it's expensive. And not everybody can afford to go out to buy a Predator 17, which is the one I have, which looks like this. This looks almost like I'm advertising. See, look, the prices are coming down. And remember, it doesn't even have a DVD. Right? Oh, yeah, my daughter's horrified, you know, she comes by and I'm sitting there and I turn this thing on and it goes, you know, and it's got all the lights and, you know, and everything else, and I don't know if you've noticed, but I'm an old bearded guy, you know, and it's just wrong that I'm doing this, you know, and I remember the year I bought a car, you know, the Isuzu died, so I bought, at the time it was a Volkswagen, and she came out and saw me and says, "Dad, you've got a hot car," as if that was wrong, you know. You need something to drive 5 minutes downhill to get to class. You know?
You put a 1080 in there, it'll make your drawings look even better.
A 1080, what is that?
It's the graphics card.
Oh, I'm not going to try that.
Hey
That
man,
sounds like
in a
it's
moment
way
here,
out
that
of
guy's
my
gonna
pay
charge
grade.
you a tech consultant fee.
Yes, well,
I mean, he's got a 1060 in that one.
you know, it does,
2 gig, what's 2 gigs?
for how much time I spend on it, because I actually spend more time on things like this than that.
You're obligated to say that, aren't you? Wink, wink.
No, you probably.
No, I really
That was
do.
a
I really
long,
do.
awkward silence.
I really do spend more time.
Don't you believe me, Ray?
You know, and if you come in and see my house, you won't be able to find the predators. It's behind a pile of books somewhere. Actually, I know where it is. It's actually still out on the table, although we're worried because, you know, that 105-pound St. Bernard can easily knock that table over. So, but hopefully she knows not to.
And then it won't be covered under your insurance if you do get a loss because it's caused by an animal or vermin.
Unless you get the
I
best.
ran into that.
The one guy has umbrella insurance for his business, and he was hoping to get coverage for something, and it turns out that his insurance is only good for umbrellas.
Right.
So the question, of course, is, this is art. We absolutely have no doubt about it, and computer gaming and, you know, all that stuff, that's absolutely art. Let me ask, is this, how many of you have seen the Mona Lisa?
In person.
Yes.
I'm looking for the, ah. Is that it?
Isn't it?
No. I think the sleeves are the wrong color. The background's different.
Background's entirely wrong, sleeves are
So this is the Prado, which is the museum in Madrid. You know, he did more than one. This is not it, of course. There's that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thyroid problem.
It's got hemp in the background too.
You mean, I don't know. I've never seen such a
Red,
thing.
France red card over Mona Lisa. But all of these up here look way too small. I guess that's about, that's a paint by number. That looks like it.
Background's too light.
What's the difference between our seeing, in fact, isn't that about the same size?
Definitely. I can be a little larger.
A little larger, actually, and I've seen it, of course, at the Louvre. Not in person, but I put my Oculus Rift on. Went to Google Earth, went to the Louvre, walked around, went and followed the line of people that starts outside of the glass pyramid, goes down the stairs, up into you buy your tickets. You know, I'm trying to picture while I'm watching all these people in line, and of course in the picture you can see that the line is not moving, right? And I have a wife that would go with me, except that, you know, that long a walk would kill her. Or just about, right? It wouldn't be good for me either. By the time we finally got into the room to see this, and how close did you get?
About as close as you can. I mean, it's roped off.
About 10 feet
I'd say
away?
about 10 feet.
Yeah. Velvet ropes on brass stands.
Whereas by the way, I have a physical printed copy of Mona Lisa that I have framed. I used to have it in my office. And I would say that's the Mona Lisa. But you know where I got it printed from? The internet. I went to a picture like this. It was a really large pixelated, right? You get 1,000+ pixels, which was what I was looking for to make it the best quality. And I hit print. And I had a printer, courtesy of, did you get Canon, right? Yeah. 17 by 14 or whatever. Not exactly.